gospel reading for this morning is from St. Matthew's Gospel, the 14th chapter, beginning at the 13th verse. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." And then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Here ends the gospel. Several years ago, there was organized for confirmation classes a pizza party. And it was at a big church downtown in Worcester, and my confirmation class at that time, I think it was 3 kids. And so the 4 of us went to this pizza party, and we were going to go through this exercise which started the party. And so when we walked into the room where the party was, there was a very elaborate, long banquet table set up. White tablecloth, candelabras, beautiful flatware and, silver and plates and goblets, not paper cups, goblets. It looked pretty nice, but there wasn't enough room for everybody in the room. And then a little farther over, with a sign 2 on it, was a table like any ordinary church table. There was a paper tablecloth on it. There was a pile of paper plates and some paper cups, and it looked like the usual not very nice table, just ordinary table. And then there was this one area that had 3 on it, and there was nothing there. There were some chairs and a piece of carpeting on the floor, but no table, no cups, no plates. And so the pastors were assigned one of these areas, and they were going to kind of lead the discussion and lead what was happening at those 3 spaces. And so I'm thinking the banquet table is going to be very nice. But I got space 3. So I walked over and sat down, and a whole bunch of kids came over. There were probably 15, 20 kids there. And we were looking across at the banquet table and at the other table. And one of the pastors comes out and says, "It's time to say grace." So we all bowed our heads, and we said grace. And the pizza is going to be served. And so at the banquet table, waiters with the draped over their arm, wearing shirts and ties, teenagers wearing shirts and ties, came out with the pizza. They said to the person at the table, "What kind of pizza would you like?" And John would say, "Well, I prefer pepperoni." So they would give him 3 slices of pepperoni. And if somebody said plain, they would get plain, or whatever, vegetable, whatever it was. And they went around the table serving everybody. And we're standing over there in space 3 thinking, okay, we have to wait to the 3rd group, but we'll get our pizza. So the people at the banquet table are eating, and they're having fun, and the pastor is talking to them about something which we don't really care about because we're looking at the pizza. And they're pretty far into the meal now, and I'm thinking, what do they have to run downtown to buy this pizza and bring it out here? Where's the next bunch of pizza? Now, a couple of people come out, kind of raggedy clothes, like some people wear. And they've got a pile of pizza boxes They come over to table number 2, just drop them on the table, walk away. So the people in group number 2, they all get up and they think, well, I guess this is our pizza. So they start getting the pizza out of the boxes, and everybody gets, and kind of everybody, a couple of people took 3 or 4 pieces, you know, some boys took 3 or 4 pieces of pizza, and then when they got done, they realized there wasn't enough for everybody to have 3 or 4 pizzas. Everybody could have 1 at least. Maybe everybody could have 2, but that was it. So now you've got people shuffling around saying, hey, I didn't get any pizza, you got 4 pieces. Oh, okay, here's 1. You know how that goes. At any rate, where's our pizza? We're in group number 3. There's no pizza. And so somebody from the kitchen comes out and says, I think we're going to run out of pizza, so I'm not sure you guys are going to get any. Now, those of you, some of you don't know me very well, but some of you know me really well. You can imagine how this radical injustice sat with me. And the kids are saying, oh, gee, aren't we going to get any pizza? And we didn't even get anything to drink. And that table over there, there were cheese and crackers on the table before they even sat down. So I'm saying, we're going to wait 10 more minutes. And if some pizza doesn't come out here, we're going to organize. I'm like Studs Terkel. I never saw a demonstration I didn't like. I never saw a protest movement I wasn't fond of. So I'm trying to organize the kids into a revolution. All right, they're still serving pizza at that banquet table. If we don't get pizza in 10 minutes, we're going to go over there and get pizza. Oh, no, we couldn't do that. We couldn't do that. I said, we're supposed to have pizza too. You know, we paid for our pizza too. We came, we paid for the pizza, because everybody had to pay their fair share. We paid as much as those people, and they're eating our pizza. Now the kids are getting real nervous because they said, what the heck kind of a pastor is this? This guy's kind of a radical or something. He's a rabble-rouser. He's a troublemaker, which of course I all took as compliments. So the 10 minutes was up, and I said, let's go. Not one kid got up. I said, we're going to go over there and get pizza. We can't do that. I'm telling you. I'm telling you, we're going to go over there and get pizza. Don't we deserve pizza? Yes, we do. Didn't we come here to have pizza? Yes, we did come here to have pizza. Didn't we pay for the pizza? Yes, we paid for the pizza. Let's go get the pizza. We can't act like that because we're in church. Finally, they bring over some pizza boxes. None of the boxes are full. Every box looks like somebody took a few pieces out on the way. So we pass around the pizza, and we've each got 1 piece, and there's 1 piece left. And so now the kids start talking, well, how should we divide up the last piece? And I am, of course, roaring mad at this point, because 1 piece of pizza is not enough for me. For most people, it wouldn't be. What's the lesson? This is the way it is in the world. Some people eat at banquet tables. Some people have huge amounts of money. We know that in our society, the space between the rich and the poor is getting bigger and bigger. A lot of the economists say the middle class is just about gone. Those of us who thought we were middle class are losing ground constantly, and the rich are getting richer. And the same thing was true in Jesus' time, you know. This is why this exercise was brought about. This was why we had these 3 different scenarios. And we were trying to teach the kids, of course, that there are people in the world who are always number 3. And there are people in the world that are always number 2. And we see in our society now that those of us who are number 2s, if you want to use that as the middle class, we're drifting closer to 3. Most of us are not drifting closer to 1. And this is the way it is in the world. Now we're hearing about in Somalia this huge, devastating hunger that's going to go on in Africa. And I'm hearing reports that this will be the biggest loss of life from starvation the world has ever seen. It's hard to imagine. And we have our own mission organizations. There are other mission organizations trying to do the best they can. But thousands, hundreds of thousands are going to die. And you know, the organizations show us that picture of the child with the extended stomach and the features all drawn in just before the child dies, and you say, what can I do about this? What can we do about this on such a massive scale? Well, it was interesting, and I said when we did the unpacking of the pizza party, those of you at the banquet table, why didn't you share? When you saw we didn't have any pizza, and you've got piles of pizza, why didn't you get up and bring us some? And they said, oh, we didn't know we could do that. We didn't know we could do that. And we laugh at that kind of stuff, but we are all locked into some kind of rules about how things go, you know. And it's amazing to me, who believes that Jesus was the ultimate radical, that these kids, my own kids, said, we can't do that. It's the church. We can't take any radical action. It's the church. We're in a church building. We can't do it. The lessons from the gospel are kind of clear in this story. And they're not so clear in our daily life, unfortunately, because it's not set up for us to get lessons. But it's pretty clear in this story. The first thing is that God cares about basic things. The most basic things, people eating, people having a place to live, people having health care, people having the very basic things they need to be a full human being. God cares about those things. Jesus talked about those things all the time. The story starts with him healing people. He came into the area, he wanted to relax, people show up, he has compassion on them, and he starts to heal them. It's the first thing always on Jesus' mind. What do these people need? What do these people need? That's a concept that you and I have to remember all the time. When we see things going on, even in our own families, we don't say, well, the proper way to do this is, or the rules are, or, but what we should say is, what do these people need? What does my loved one need? What does my friend need? What does my neighbor need? And then act accordingly. And the basics in life, to God and to Jesus, are always signs of justice. If everybody gets the basics, then we have a just society. If people don't get even the basics, the society is unjust. If poor people cannot be fed, if poor people cannot get part of the good things in life that you and I have and worry about, then it's an unjust society. And it's not only a sign of justice, it's also a sign of community. You know how it is when you walk into a place, and it's like the old Cheers thing, you know, where everybody knows your name. You walk into a place, you've got friends around you, they smile at you. When I was first attending a Southern Baptist church, before I got to be their youth minister, I'd come in and I had two groups of friends, and these two groups of friends sat on different sides of the church. And it was a wonderful feeling. You might think it was a little silly, but they'd say, Tim, over here, sit with us, sit with us. And the other team, you know, sit with us, don't sit with them. Come on over here, sit with us. And they, of course, were joking. But it was a great feeling. Can you imagine that? People coming, come here with us. One person said, don't sit next to me, though, because you sing too loud. Sit in the next row. That's community. And that's what Jesus is after. The basic things come first, and then when the basic things are provided, people can be in community where they're loved and where they're cared for, and when people know who they are and want to be part of their lives. God provides, is what this lesson teaches too. But it's hard to believe in our society, isn't it, that God provides? Provides what? What does God provide? What can I count on for God, from God? Unless I have to work for it myself, I'm not sure what God provides. And in a consumerist society, when we say what we need from God, it's kind of a long list, you know. It's like kids writing a Christmas list. You remember when you were a kid? What did you put on the list? I used to say to my dad, that's not a big enough piece of paper, Dad. I need a bigger piece of paper. Those who have want to dictate also what the basics should be for those people who have not. I find that an interesting dynamic. I don't know if you heard, a couple of news stations reported this and then it got passed around a little bit. The Heritage Foundation came out with a report to try to show us what poor people are really like, because we don't really know what poor people are like. But what they wanted to show us was that poor people really aren't so poor. So they reported this. Did you know 70% of poor people have a refrigerator? How can they call themselves poor? 46% of the poor people have microwaves. Now that's an extravagancy, isn't it? I think they're $59 at Target. What was this report about? We don't think they're poor? If you have a refrigerator? Oh, you don't need any help. You must be doing well. You have a microwave? That's kind of a luxury. It's the idea that some people in society decide what other people should have, which is completely, I think, unjust. What God wants us to see is that we have the basic things, and that's why Jesus tells this story. I want to read you a quote from this book, Love Wins. This is written by Rob Bell, who's a young evangelical pastor. And there's really some remarkable things in theology among young pastors today and young theologians. And this person happens to be one of my favorites. And this bringing the basics to people, this being Jesus for other people, is what he's talking about. And he's talking about the world that Jesus sees that we should live in, the world that God designed. He says this, of course, to celebrate this, anticipate this world, we find ourselves thrilled by the promise of the world made right. But it brings with it the haunting thought that we each know that lurks in our own hearts, and that is our own role in corrupting this world. The litany of ways in which our own sins have contributed to the heartbreak we're surrounded by. At all those times we hardened our heart and kept right on walking, ignoring the cry of someone in need. Everyone in this room has done it. We've all had times when there was a cry for need and we didn't respond. And the reasons why we didn't respond are all kinds of different reasons, I know. And it doesn't make us terrible people. It makes us people that continually need to hear the message that Jesus said, God is love. Do the loving thing. And you know, when the disciples hear about what's happening, the disciples have compassion. And where did that compassion come from? See, it's rubbing off from Jesus. You know, like you say, the chip off the old block. I don't know if you've ever used that phrase, but boy, that kid's a chip off the old block. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not so good. But when we use it in a good way, we like that. People used to say to me, you know, you look just like your dad. You're a chip off the old block. And I always was very proud of that. My father died when I was 24 years old, and I didn't really get to know enough about him. So now I have a world around me about him that I have to kind of piece together from lots of different stories. But the disciples had Jesus right in front of him. And what God wanted them to be was a chip off the Jesus block. And so they're compassionate in this story. They say, oh, you know, it's getting late and these people haven't eaten. And Jesus says to them, can you imagine yourself now? You sit down, even if it was just our yard here. Let's say we had this big thing out here and somebody was talking and everybody in town wanted to come and listen. And so they filled up the yard and they spilled over into the parking lot. And we had a loudspeaker set up. And we were sponsoring this, our church. And there was 1,000 people out here. Let's say maybe 2,000. I don't know how we squeeze them in. But in this group here, this group today, we're standing there. And you said to me, somebody came to me and said, we got to feed these people. Let's send them home so they can get food. We'll say we're going to take up the work again at 7 o'clock. Come back. And I said, no, you feed them. All of you, feed them. Some of you wouldn't have even heard that. You'd just say, ugh, there he goes again. We don't know what the heck he's talking about. Some of you would say, oh, how can we do that? But this is the scene that you have here. Jesus says, no, don't send them home. You feed them. The disciples are crucial to Jesus. Those disciples on that day and you and me today. Jesus says to us, you feed them. I don't know how you're going to do it, but figure out a way to do it. I have confidence that you will do it. He didn't say to the disciples or take one of them inside and say, watch these fools. They're going to try to do this. I was only kidding, you know. You can't feed 5,000 people. Those numbers, by the way, in the Bible are always, they're not literal numbers. They just represent huge groups of people. We don't know how many people were there. You feed them. And the disciples, he believed, would find a way to do that. Did he participate? Yes, he did participate. But the disciples are indispensable. And the disciples act on orders from Jesus, which seem impossible. And every time we come to church, and every time we read the Gospels, and every time we hear the stories about what Jesus did, and every time we are told that we now are the hands and feet, the eyes and ears of Jesus on the earth, the thought passes through your mind, I'll bet, just as it does mine. It's impossible. Just like this story. And yet we are told the people were fed. Because Jesus said, you feed them. One thing the disciples did not do, or learned not to do, was to talk about how scarce things were in the world, how scarce good things were, how impossible the world was and couldn't be conquered. In the recent issue of Sojourners magazine, I want to quote from a writer here. Like the disciples in Matthew, we often assume scarcity where there is abundance. We look in the wrong places for what will sustain us, and we fail to believe that God equips us with the tools to provide for and nourish one another. That should be a church's mission statement. We believe that God will equip us. God will give us the tools to nourish one another and also to nourish the world. There isn't anything else really. Amen. We join together in singing the hymn, Thy Word.